you, Ron, and thank you so much for having me, Rod, and the team, Low Carb Down Under team. It's a massive honour to be first up to open the conference and also to get it out of the way. So awesome. A win for me. My talk is on ADHD, autism and metabolic health. And I want to look at this topic through a different lens. Often autism and ADHD are looked at through a behavioural lens. That's where the focus is on. So I'm going to take this to the metabolic health side of things and have a look there at potentially how does metabolic health impact autism and ADHD? Does it? And also, if it does, what about nutritional therapies? Could they be effective for autism and ADHD? First of all, I'd like to take you to England, sunny England, where I'm from. This special education needs school that I was working in just before I moved to Australia. It's called Woodside Lodge. I was carrying out a food pilot there. Some of the pupils had agreed to change their foods for 1 week. And they were switching out their highly processed, repetitive foods often, lots and lots of junk food. And they were switching that to real foods, only foods that were being prepared by us at the centre. That was their breakfast, their lunch, their dinner was being sent home, and all of their snacks were provided as well. So one morning I arrived at the school and I'm carrying a big box of all of the different ingredients I'm about to prepare for the students. And I noticed a bit of a kerfuffle in one of the rooms, you know, when the energy just feels a little bit different. But I didn't check in with them then. I had lots to do, lots of cooking to do. But later on I was talking to staff and they were telling me what had been going on there. They were telling me that one of the students, a boy, I'll call him John, 16-year-old boy with autism, he was taking part in the school food pilot with us and eating only our foods. And that morning he had been found singing, dancing and hoovering the common room. And it got everyone up, going, and there was a lot of fun, people really enjoying that moment of fun. And the reason that was so profound to the school staff there was because John would normally come in the morning, every single morning, with his support worker in a taxi. And he would go to a desk, put his head on the desk, lie there, and put a hoodie over his head. He would not engage, no matter what activities, his favourite type of activities, his favourite therapies, he would not engage in the mornings. He was too sleepy. And he was often rude as well with that, and just no ability to interact. So they found this particularly exciting, that food within a few days had made such a transformative change in him. And it was the remarkable changes in his core symptoms, social skills, and his communication, positivity. He was much more upbeat for the rest of the week as well. I'm starting with this story about John and the school because I find this is what it's all about for me as a nutritionist. It really is. It comes back to the changes that you have seen and we can see in people. And I've seen this in other children his age, younger children and adults. These profound changes can happen quite quickly. So what's going on with the situation with autism and ADHD? I think it's no surprise to anyone that the prevalence has shot up, skyrocketed. It's quadrupled within one generation. So we're now at 1 in 36 diagnosed with autism, and in some areas of America that's 1 in 22, and 1 in 9 being diagnosed with ADHD. The reasons are complex, and screening and diagnostics is a part of that. We are more aware, but also genetics, they're heritable, highly heritable conditions. But I'm going to focus in on the food piece. Food as a key factor that influences that genetic predisposition. So California, I said it was a global prevalence, so it's globally increased, but in some areas around the world, where you live matters, and actually your wealth matters. So starting in around the year 2000 in California, they started noticing that the trends and the prevalence of autism were plateauing. They were no longer rising like the rest of California and the rest of America and the world. And in fact, then they started to decline and have been in decline for the last 2 decades. So something in the most wealthiest neighborhoods in California, Santa Clara, Silicon Valley, the coastal counties, they're able to mitigate their children's risk of autism. This has been seen in other areas in Sweden, a massive study in Stockholm. 640,000 children their records were reviewed, and they again found a disparity between the wealthy and the poor. And again, with ADHD, a large-scale meta-analysis found this: where you live and how poor your neighbourhood is or your family, your children are more likely to be diagnosed with autism and their symptoms more likely to be severe. So the researchers have suggested that food could play a vital role in this. We know that food poverty is a big issue increasingly, and access to food is becoming more of a challenge. So with ADHD and autism, there are specific challenges to those conditions that we know, so around social learning and communication. But we also know that somebody with ADHD and somebody with autism are much more likely to be diagnosed with a co-occurring condition. So much so that 8 in 10 US children with ADHD have a mental, emotional, behavioural or development condition. So 8 in 10, 80%. I think that's staggering. 74% of individuals with autism have one or more comorbidity, and 50% have 4 or more. So you can imagine all of the additional challenges that's bringing to that individual. So they're the brain and the mind-related co-occurring conditions, but also you're more likely as an autistic or ADHD individual to have physical health co-occurring conditions. 58% of autistic children are more likely to be obese than non-autistic children, and 50% of autistic adults are more likely to have diabetes type 2, and also lower life expectancy. And I don't think that's well known. Autism and ADHD's individuals are likely to have a shorter lifespan. And why is this? I think this is something we should be really, really delving into and looking to see if we can find out what the missing pieces are of the puzzle. We know that they are bidirectional, these types of conditions. And what I mean by that is, if you have ADHD, you're more likely to go on and develop epilepsy. And that could happen the other way around. And the same with diabetes type 2. If you have an ADHD or a person with autism is more likely to develop diabetes, and that can happen vice versa, I find that really intriguing. And what is the underlying biological metabolic factors that might influence that relationship? So these co-occurring conditions that I've mentioned, diabetes and obesity, cardiovascular disease, metabolic syndrome, those types of conditions, we know low carb down under, audience know very well, blood glucose, insulin resistance, as we've already mentioned, they are the foundations to those conditions. They're also, excitingly, treated, as we again know well, with low carb and ketogenic diet, metabolic brain nutrition therapies. Emerging evidence is showing us really exciting, I think, this field. Mental health also responds remarkably well to low carb and ketogenic diets. So conditions like bipolar and schizophrenia, OCD, and neurology as well, epilepsy, neurodegenerative conditions, Alzheimer's, and dementia are responding brilliantly. We're having really emerging evidence coming out on those. So neurodevelopment conditions, autism and ADHD, they seem to be neglected here, but they're also part of the same brain. So should we be considering this as well, these same treatments? A quick word on metabolism. How efficiently our body turns food into energy. We eat carbohydrates, blood glucose rises, insulin directs that into the cell. Where that goes wrong and insulin resistance occurs is where we eat that high sugar, high starch, those typical modern foods that kids and teens are particularly eating. They eat the most by far. so they're more susceptible, then that's when our cells can become resistant to insulin and be short on energy, causing insulin resistance. This paper, I find this one really, really fascinating. It's a real geek fest, this one. So 2022, this came out. It's a Danish study looking at, it was really big, looking at 1.9 million adults. And they were investigating this very, very topic that I'm talking about, whether insulin-related physical disorders like the type 2 diabetes, like the obesity, does that share a genetic link with brain disorders like autism and ADHD? So they found really fascinating insulin signaling problems that are common in type 2 diabetes, common in obesity. They do contribute to ADHD and autism. And they also found genetic links between those conditions, between autism and ADHD and physical disorders. And they share the same insulin pathways. So exciting, I think this study is, and it strongly places insulin dysfunction as having a key role in autism and ADHD, as well as other brain-related conditions like OCD and Alzheimer's. So this study gives us a new understanding of autism and ADHD. And this might explain to us a bit more, give us much more of a clue as to why children with autism and ADHD, why we're often hearing that they are the ones who are more prone to eating sugar. They seem to crave these types of foods and seek them out and eat more of them. So maybe this has given us a big insight into that relationship. In fact, blood glucose and insulin problems are already showing up in individuals with autism and ADHD in kids years before any of those physical co-occurring conditions might show up. So popped in a table here of some of the clinical trials in children that were looking at exactly this topic, blood glucose and how they're responding, as well as insulin resistance. And they found in these studies the children were more dysregulated, those with autism and ADHD, compared to controls, children without autism and ADHD. So, for example, Manco et al. 2021, this one was looking at 300 children with and without autism, and they found that fasted insulin levels are higher in children with autism. And then the remaining studies are around ADHD. So we have teens with ADHD having higher insulin and exhibiting lower attention and self-control. And in a further study, children with ADHD, again, significantly lower insulin sensitivity found in that cohort. Next studies, glucose tolerance test found impaired glucose, and the children with ADHD that were tested experienced headache, temper, and irritability after taking that glucose load for the test. And further studies, again, blood glucose higher in ADHD groups. So really with these studies, I'm demonstrating this point that before we see physical manifestations, that they have a dysfunction potentially of their insulin and their blood glucose that we need to be aware of because of this underlying relationship. And they're not tolerating carbs and sugars as the other children are perhaps doing. So how does this relate to the brain? Well, the brain, as we know, probably is the hungriest organ of our body, taking 20% of the body's energy, and it's only 2% of the body's weight. Brain insulin resistance occurs when brain cells become less responsive to insulin, and that can exacerbate symptoms of the core symptoms that we see in autism and ADHD, like the focus, control, and the emotional regulation as well. I think this study explains that really well, that relationship with the brain energy. So this is an older study, 1990, a blinded study with 75 adults with and without ADHD. They were injected with radioactive glucose, and then their brains were PET scanned as they undertook listening tests, checking them for attention, recall, their memory, concentration. The researchers found in this study that ADHD adults also, like the children, also have impaired glucose uptake in key areas of the brain. So they have that dysfunction and it's showing up. So when we carry out tasks and we're perhaps getting ready for a test at school, or we've got an interview, we're using much more brain glucose. But and this area shows where people might struggle with autism and ADHD because their cells are not taking that in specific regions. And the study says glucose metabolism was significantly reduced in 30 out of 60 specific regions of the brain. So half of the regions of the brain that they studied had impaired glucose uptake. And they were regions responsible for attention, distractibility, restlessness, and impulsivity. So this, again, I think highlights really well the issues with blood glucose and insulin resistance with people with ADHD. So here it's brain energy that's being starved. And so now let's look at how else this might show up in different ways. So looking at maternal and paternal health. So only 12% of Americans are metabolically healthy, which is a devastating, I think, number. Where America goes with their food and their health, the rest of the world follows, so that's not good news. And parents' metabolic health influences neurodivergence as well. So the statistics here bear that out. So if a father has obesity, or if a mother has obesity or diabetes, or polycystic ovary syndrome, they have double the risk of their child developing autism. And if a mother has gestational diabetes or she has obesity, again, she has double the risk of her child developing ADHD. So significant doubling of the risk. So parents' insulin resistance and metabolic health play a huge role in the baby's brain and development and neurodivergence. So there's more bad news. If they have two of those conditions, say obesity and diabetes, the risk has doubled again, so that child has 4 times the risk of developing autism. And this is not to blame anybody. This is not about shaming. This is really about raising that awareness and making sure that that important factor is known. And many of us feel that people are being let down by their food environment to let this happen. So literature review in 2023, looking at this very issue, looking at whether diabetes during pregnancy affects the baby's brain development. And they found with their studies, their investigations, that high blood glucose during pregnancy does disrupt a baby's brain development, predisposing to neurocognitive and behavioural problems, and can lead to autism and ADHD, as well as other types of learning difficulties and neurodevelopment problems. And what about food that we're eating? Does that play a role during pregnancy? This study that came out, Zupo et al. 23, quite recent study, narrative review, looking at the data on ultraprocessed food and eating those during pregnancy. And they found that ultraprocessed food does actually impair cognitive development, and as well, inversely, that if you're having a minimally processed diet, that actually improves verbal intelligence and executive function. So a clear relationship that they're finding there. And how does this play out in children and their diet, eating ultra-processed foods? Del Ponte, recent study, systematic review from Brazil, who are leading in this field of ultra-processed food and all of those studies, they found that children and teens, and I mentioned earlier that they're the ones who are eating the majority of those foods and drinks, eating an ultra-processed food diet does increase ADHD risk, and minimally processed food, getting back to whole foods, whole ingredients, that actually is protective against developing ADHD. So what are ultra-processed foods? Just really quickly, any foods in a packet, really. It's probably an ultra-processed food. They are 5 or more ingredients generally, made of industrial processes, made of industrial ingredients, stuff that you wouldn't be able to access yourselves because they're industrial. They make food like substances. They're not actually real food. They often come with health claims. They might be saying that they're natural, they're high in fibre, they're plant-based, but yes, avoid as much as we can. And the interesting thing in terms of ADHD and autism about these foods specifically is that, yes, these foods are excessively high in sugars and carbs typically, and we know that those with autism and ADHD perhaps respond much worse to these types of foods. They have the ability to dysregulate their blood glucose and insulin, and that has a knock-on effect, potentially of starving the brain of that crucial brain energy that they need. So yes, ADHD and autism more vulnerable to these types of foods. So in that section, talk through a lot of different aspects of how with autism and ADHD you could be impacted by insulin resistance, metabolic health. So I've talked about the co-occurring conditions, impaired blood glucose and insulin resistance behind the scenes before we're even aware of that from a young age as well, starving us of brain energy. We've looked as well at those maternal and paternal risks. So a lot of information, and we also know as well that somebody with ADHD or autism are responding differently to those types of foods. So there's a lot of doom and gloom, I'm fear, I'm sorry, but on the other side, on the flip side, if we can pinpoint insulin resistance, metabolic health, then it means that we potentially have therapy options. So nutritional therapies, what we're here to talk about this weekend. I think it's exciting stuff. As has been mentioned, once you understand how exciting this can be for different conditions, it's pretty awesome stuff. The exciting thing here is that we have for ADHD and autism 2 current therapies, the popular therapies that are pharmaceutical, they're the drugs, the meds, and we've got the behavioural, but they don't tackle root cause. This nutritional therapy, as we've seen with other metabolic-linked conditions, insulin-resistant-linked conditions, could be a means for us to tackle root cause. How exciting is that after all that doom? Sorry. So yes, talking about the different types of foods, these are the types of nutritional protocols, and there are very specific ones because we're tackling that insulin and that blood glucose. So first of all, ultra-processed food-free as a foundation. And then depending on you, this is personal, depending on the person you're treating, then you might want to go further. You might want to reduce those carbohydrates to manage that insulin blood glucose even further. Or ketogenic diet, specific benefits from a ketogenic diet I'll come on to, or ketovore, carnivore type approaches. A lot of people out there, we have a lot of anecdotal information coming through and exciting new research projects looking at those in particular, looking at how animal-based and meat-based diets are having exciting results. And there might be good reasons people choose those type of approaches for more nutrient-dense foods, more satiating. But the foundation is ultra-processed foods, getting those out. So the beige out, and out with the fillers and in with the thrillers, as I like to say. So we're moving away from your bread, your toast, your cereals, your pasta, all of those things, and then we're back to what maybe your grandparents might have eaten, again, the fish, the meats, the eggs, the butter, the dairy, nuts and vegetables, and the oils, the healthier oils. And I want to acknowledge that it can be extremely hard for anybody to change their foods. That's important, and particularly with autism and maybe ADHD as well. But particularly with autism, we do have resistance, we do have food avoidance, and we do have safe foods. So we do have issues, but any food changes to get rid of the ultra-processed foods and improve those with real foods, anything is a win. So any steps you can take. And I'd encourage anyone trying this to keep a diary, because then you can notice how your symptoms are improving with these food changes over time and feel that difference, see that difference. A case study of how this works in practice, just quickly, working with different schools over time that have seen changes, and they've changed their ultra-processed foods mainly, and their sugar, they've taken those out, and in with the real foods, the natural whole foods. And these are special education needs schools, and also mainstream schools have introduced these foods. And they've seen different variety of results depending on the different cohorts. So some have seen improvements with weight and metabolic health, which is awesome. Attention, focus, behavior, attendance as well, interestingly. Improved communication and the ability to understand instructions, less irritability and reduced aggression. So exciting results with changing their foods around. So ketogenic diet, I have to have a word on ketogenic diet because it is so unique. It's such a special and such a powerful therapy. This therapy is so different, mainly because of the way it has the ability to fuel our brain differently. When I showed the image of the brain and talked about the brain starving of energy earlier, that can happen even when the brain and the body is swimming in glucose. So we could be well fed and having blood glucose circulating, the body needs that for energy, the brain needs that for energy, but with insulin resistance, that's not going in. A ketogenic diet gives us the opportunity to switch to the body's other natural fuel source, generating ketones and getting the body into ketosis, so the body can use fat and energy for fuel instead. So that's an exciting opportunity for somebody with that under-energized brain. And as Beth Zupak Kenya told me, nutritionist who's been treating children with ketogenic diet for decades, she hasn't seen one case with autism yet that has not responded to a ketogenic diet positively and has not had some degree of improvements, and some of them have had radical improvements. So a very exciting therapy, I'd say. And additional advantages on top of that exciting dual fuel ability, a ketogenic diet has the potential to enhance mitochondrial function, gut microbiome. It's disease suppressing, as we've seen in epilepsy, and anti-inflammatory brain inflammation and antioxidant stress. And they are all factors that can be part of an autism development. Ketogenic clinical trials have been undertaken with children. They range from 3 to 6 months in duration, and different approaches, some using MCT, some using traditional ketogenic diets. And they show exciting promise for ketogenic diet as a therapy for autism. So they're getting significant results around core autism features, improving behaviours, cognition, sociability. I've pulled out some statements from these. Nutrient deficiencies restored. Nutrient deficiencies are a huge topic in themselves in terms of autism and ADHD. And improved behaviour scores. Modified Atkins diet scored highest for cognition and sociability in that clinical trial with children. And 60% of children responding. So we're getting the majority of children responding and improving their childhood autism ratings, and some very significantly improving those scales. So really, really good work being done there. With ADHD, these are all with autism. With ADHD, we don't have the clinical trials as yet, but excitingly, 2 ADHD trials are coming on next year, and they're happening. One of them's happening in Oxford University with Ali Houston next year. That's going to be exciting. I'll be paying attention to how that goes. And that is my whistle-stop tour, my quick tour of metabolic brain connection for autism and ADHD. Find it a really interesting subject. I think we're in an emerging point in this field where we're going to start seeing a lot more information coming out about this, and excitingly as well about the nutritional opportunities. And I will leave you back in England with the Woodside Lodge staff and their views on this topic and how they feel about autism and ADHD and the nutritional changes.
Woodside Lodge is an outdoor learning centre. We have approximately 30 students across various bases locally. They all have a diagnosis of ASD, And we have a big emphasis on outdoor learning. So they have an individual timetable. We have 2 ponies and very beautiful grounds for them to get out and about.
The feedback that we've had so far has been predominantly from staff within the school, and it has been very positive, especially with a 16-year-old male who did the food trial. Historically always had an issue with mornings, transitions to and from lessons and at the end of the day. And I know that parents have also had issues getting him to bed. However, for the week that we did the food trial, there was a notable change in his behaviours around, especially in the morning, where we saw a lot of actual happy behaviours, wanting to be here, even singing at one point. So from our point of view, that is a very, very positive thing indeed.
But we've noticed a lot of difference with doing the vacuuming the other day, in the morning, 9 o'clock in the morning, 9:30 in the morning. Normally just quite tired at that all the time, and he was doing, well, he was dancing. It was dancing while he was doing it, which is amazing. So and I was watching from the outside the door, so. Right.
As a boy that would, throw at stuff as well as fling it, and instead of that, he'd rather hoover the commons better himself. That says it all. I think it's given them both a little bit of independence as well.
Some of them, sandwich, packet of crisp, a drink, and then a chocolate bar or something.
Right. And it'll be a sweet drink.
And it will be a sweet drink. Yeah. It will be a chocolate, Mars bar or something. Yeah. Some of them bring in like Pringles and can go through the whole tin. Yeah. Some of them bring a packet of biscuits and stuff and go through the whole packet.
I honestly think that if you guys could cook for our kids every day, breakfast, lunch and evening meal, then actually we'd see a massive, massive change in the students' behaviour. You only have to look at some of the diets that our students have. Often it's very restricted because of rigidity. And often that means that a packet of crisps and a bar of chocolate could be their breakfast. And we all know what sugar can do to the body. So cutting all of that out, replacing it with actually things that do benefit your body, helps for a sounder mind.
Thank you so much for your time, everybody.